In this module, we'll cover policies and procedures, the Cybersecurity Management System, CSMS, the process to develop a CSMS, and the CSMS top-level activities. You may be familiar with the ISO IEC 27000 series of standards, typically used by information technology, IT. We'll discuss how the ISA IEC 62443-2-1 and the ISO IEC 27000 series are complementary parts in managing the information security of an organization. Other topics include how to develop a cybersecurity management system, CSMS, identify the 6 top-level activities, and summarize how a CSMS is based on the ISA IEC 62443-2-1. After you complete this module, you should be able to discuss the complementary nature of ISA IEC 62443-2-1 and ISO IEC 27001. Identify what categories and elements are in an ISA IEC 62443-2-1 CSMS. Summarize how to develop a CSMS based on ISA IEC 62443-2-1.
So this slide is showing section 7, establishing an industrial automation and control system security program.
As you can see in the slide's title, there's a CSMS and an ISMS. ISO IEC 27001 provides requirements for establishing, implementing, maintaining, and continually improving an information security management system. Key in on the words security management system. ISO 27001 provides a list of commonly accepted controls to be used as a reference for establishing security requirements. ISO 27002 provides further detailed guidance for organizations implementing these information security controls. A white paper from the ISA GCA, the International Society of Automation's Global Security Alliance, covers applying ISO and ISA series for operational technology environments. The title is Applying ISO IEC 27001 and 27002 and the ISA IEC 62443 series for operational technology environments. If your organization already has an Information Security Management System, ISMS, based on the ISO 27000 series, you may be able to leverage the ISMS to aid in developing an ISA 62443 Cybersecurity Management System, CSMS. Use the ISMS policy and procedures as templates in developing the CSMS. You don't have to reinvent the security wheel. This diagram shows how ISO IEC 27001 and 2 addresses the information security of an organization's office environment. The ISA IEC 62443 addresses the operation technology environment. The information we'll cover in this section comes from the series overview. The second group, second row down, Policies and Procedures, 62443-2-1, Security Program Requirements for IACS Asset Owners. This will be our primary source for talking about the CSMS. I'll be referring to this standard as Part 2-1. Here's an overview of our Cybersecurity Management System, CSMS. I'll be referring to this acronym as CSMS. In this slide, we point out the different categories, elements, and element groups. In the next few slides, we'll list each of the categories. We'll then go through the process of creating a cybersecurity management system. You can refer to your notes for this graphic. You can also find it in the 62443. Here are our 3 categories: risk analysis, addressing risks with the cybersecurity management system, monitoring, and improving the cybersecurity management system. Then we have the elements within the categories: business rationale, risk identification up here, with risk analysis down here at the bottom. Compliance, review and improve and maintain the CSMS. Rinse, lather, and repeat is what I usually call this type of a section. Then we have element groups within this category of addressing risk with the CSMS. Let me run over that once more. We have 3 categories. Categories consist of the elements and element groups, as you see in this slide. Developing a CSMS is a journey that may take months or years to achieve, and it is a continuous process. You are never done. It's important to get familiar with the layout of the standards to get the full benefit of the informative annexes. I'd like you to open NoteSet Volume 2. Go to Part 2-1 on page 22 and read Normative Clause 4, Elements of a Cybersecurity Management System, which begins on page 22. Let's look at it. Figure 1, page 23, is a graphical view of elements of a cybersecurity management system. Then we have Annex A, page 47, is informative guidance for developing the CSMS. Annex B, page 155, is an informative process to develop the CSMS. It has references to Annex A. Where applicable, there's a reference to Annex A within the boxes of any of the figures that you see in Annex B. Now, if you haven't looked at these, you might want to pause and go look at Part 2-1. Look at Figure 1, Annex A, and Annex B. Going through the clauses, subclauses, elements, sub-elements, and the annexes can be overwhelming. We're going to walk through and try to help you connect the dots to see where this was all developed from. So if you open your Part 2-1, we're going to go to Subclause 4.2.2, Element Business Rationale, on page 24. That Element Business Rationale objective has identified and documented the unique needs of an organization to address cyber risks for IACS. Now we're going to go to Annex A, which is informative and located on page 49 of the standard. We're going to find the same thing, Element Business Rationale, A.2.2. The A stands for Annex. Again, page 49, you see the same type of a layout. In this informative annex, you connect back to the subclause 4.2.2, and that's the element of business rationale. The next step is Annex B on page 157 of Part 2-1. Looking at B.3, Bravo.3, Activity Initiate the CSMS Program. Here we have the process using a developing business rationale on page 157, and the boxes are in yellow. This refers to Annex A, which refers to the subclause 4.2.2. The 3 main categories are risk analysis, addressing risk with the CSMS, and monitoring and improving the CSMS. Risk analysis has 2 elements. What is this risk analysis? It's background information that feeds into many of the other elements, so it's critical and crucial. The 2 elements of risk analysis are business rationale and risk identification, classification, and assessment. Addressing risk has 3 element groups: security policy, organization, and awareness, selected security countermeasures, and implementation. Monitoring and improving the cybersecurity management system has 2 elements: conformance and review, improve, and maintain the CSMS. You should find these in Part 2-1 on page 23 of the standard.
Okay, please note that risk analysis as group elements, elements. Risk analysis has 2 elements. Addressing risk with CMS as 3 element groups. Similarly, monitoring and improving CMS has 2 elements. So only addressing risk with CMS has 3 element groups, because each of these element groups are again classified into different elements. So risk analysis has 2 elements, addressing risk with CSMS has 3 element groups, monitoring and improving CSMS has 2 elements.
A frequent mistake we may make is we initially address smaller pieces. Our engineering approach is to break the problem into smaller pieces, but we need to address the entire set of the IACS and integrate the physical, the HSE, Health, Safety and Environmental, and Cybersecurity Risk Assessment results. Policies, procedures, practices, and personnel come into play. There's probably going to be a cultural change required in the organization. Security is a balance of risk versus cost. All situations are different. IACS risk may have an unrecoverable impact. The business risk may only be a temporary financial setback, but if HSE, health, safety, and environment is impacted, it can be permanent. A cookbook approach to these mandatory security practices isn't good either. It becomes overly restrictive and costly. It doesn't fit your situation. It can be insufficient to realistically address the risk. It's not a one-size-fits-all set of security practices. There is no 100% security. You can find this information in Part 2-1 on page 11. So we're going to focus on the ordering and iterative nature of these activities that are associated with developing your security management system program, or adding it onto what you have existing already, or improving what you have. This may be a journey that will take months or years to achieve. It depends on what you already have in place. This is a foundational element of starting off with the 62443s. If you don't have anything, there are elements and sub-elements that we've talked about, and the reference for researching more information on a particular topic. Guidance should be tailored to the organization's requirements. ISA 62443-2-1 contains a combination of should, may, and shall requirements. Clause 4 states what should be included in the CSMS in Part 2-1. The guidance provided in this course is an example, and this comes from Annex A. You must read the standards carefully and see what policies and procedures can be tailored to fit your organization. The elements of a CSMS include an objective, description, rationale, and the requirements. If you go to page 21 of your Part 2-1, look at subclause 3.3. You'll see how the elements are laid out. Here are the 6 top-level activities of a CSMS. Notice the iterative processes. You've got arrows running all over the place. There are many common dependencies when using a process where you're doing risk assessment and initiating any type of cybersecurity management system. Click on each box in the process to review a brief introduction to each activity. Next, we'll drill down into each one.
Initiate CSMS program. Establish purpose, organizational support, resources, scope. Initiate high-level risk assessment. Drives the content of CSMS, threats, likelihood, vulnerabilities, consequences. Address risk assessment at a high level to reduce resource expenses and to establish an overall risk context. Next is detailed risk assessment, detailed technical assessment, focus on vulnerabilities identified at initial high level. Next, establish policy, organization, and awareness, driven by initial high level and detailed risk assessment results, creation of policies and procedures, assignment of organizational responsibilities, planning and execution of training. Select and implement countermeasures, defines and implement cybersecurity defenses, technical and non-technical both. Maintain the CSMS in an organization maturing in its CSMS activities. Is organization maturing in its CSMS activities? Does organization conform to policies and procedures? Are cybersecurity goals met effectively? Do the goals need to change in light of internal or external events? Is a review of initial high level or detailed risk assessment required? Are there improvements identified and implemented? Are there training enhancements to make? Has enthusiasm and support waned? Have other priorities pushed CSMS to back burner?
So you'll need to find balance in this whole process. We can't afford perfect security. There is no perfect security. Risk reduction is balanced against the cost of security measures to mitigate the risk. So here we have costs and we have security level. We have to find that sweet spot, the crossover point. What's the cost of security measures and what's the probable cost of security breaches? What security level are we going to try to meet? There's a lot to consider. For those familiar with project management and do a lot of projects, this cybersecurity management system approach is similar to Project Management 101. Let's take a closer look at each of these activities. So the framework has got to start at the top. Obtaining leadership commitment, support, and funding is paramount. If you don't have leadership support, then your program is going to fail. Develop a business rationale that will justify the program to management.
Okay, in this, he is talking about the first phase, that is initiate the CSMS program. Let's begin from the start.
So the framework has got to start at the top. Obtaining leadership commitment, support, and funding is paramount. If you don't have leadership support, then your program is going to fail. Develop a business rationale that will justify the program to management. Consider what business consequences senior management will find the most compelling. Next, develop a proposed scope for the CSMS. Use rationale and scope to identify your stakeholders who can join in the effort to engage management for commitment. The stakeholders need to be cross-functional in nature. Process control staff, operations staff responsible for making the product, safety management staff responsible for the health, safety and environmental, HSE, physical security staff, don't forget them, IT responsible for network and server design support, IT security staff responsible for IT security. This will vary depending on how your organization is structured and how large you are. Additional resources that might be needed. What about legal? You need to involve legal. Human resources. Human resources, why do I need them? Well, you might be doing some background checks here. Maybe raise some policies and procedures. That's their bailiwick within the organization. Then there's customer support roles, order fulfillment roles, vendors, third-party contractors. Senior management must see the hard numbers and reasoning backed up with solid evidence from your whole risk assessment. Finding the right metrics is not a trivial task. You have to identify all these stakeholders. It's going to help you bring it all together. Let's take a look at our high-level risk assessment. You need to define the methodology for identifying risks and then identify the risks themselves. Next, define the methodology for assessing the priority of risks. Once the priority of risks has been assessed, document the results with rationale. Notice the tie-in to stakeholders. We must select methodologies for identifying and prioritizing these risks, and then execute those methodologies. We must identify them up front and provide the structure for the rest of the risk assessment. We want to involve the stakeholders identified during the initiate step. The common pitfall here is to immediately jump into a detailed risk assessment. It's easy to do, especially with technical stakeholders. We have this shiny object syndrome where we tend to go, "Ooh, look at that. I'm going to go chase that for now. Ooh, look, I want to chase that one now." Avoid that shiny object syndrome, especially when you're doing the risk assessment. You get to see some cool things, but you got to stay focused and stay on track. What are some of the methodologies? Methodologies could include qualitative versus quantitative, or scenario-based versus asset-based. There's more information you can dig into in Annex A, pages 57 and 58. Documenting the results and rationale is important. Documentation is very important. In the auditing world, if you don't document it, then you didn't do it. That's how it's approached. Documentation helps you establish a baseline. It's going to be invaluable when you do your risk assessments. When you do your repeats, your reviews, you want to confirm something's gone wrong or something didn't happen. You have that due diligence that you did good documentation. Common pitfalls. Documentation isn't sufficient. It's never completed. There should be a champion appointed for good follow-up. Have a scribe, somebody who's responsible for that. Your program manager for this whole process may not be able to keep up with everything. You have to get some buy-in from senior management so you have the resources you need. Make sure the documentation is being taken care of and that it's consistent. So we've done our high-level risk assessment. Now let's look at the detailed risk assessment. Start with an inventory of your IACS systems, networks, and devices. Go back to Annex A, page 65. It's going to give you a lot more detail in this area. Screen and prioritize. Identify detailed vulnerabilities. Identify and prioritize associated risks. Note that the initial high-level risk assessment and updating the high-level risk assessments are part of the support for this. These are iterative and tied together. The process can get complicated. Diagrams like this could help you stay on track and focused as you continue getting buy-in from your stakeholders. You can provide greater detail by conducting an inventory of all the specific system networks and devices. Resource or time constraints may not allow a detailed examination of all these assets. Use previous findings and history. You'll have to use the threats, consequences, and types of vulnerabilities identified from the high-level risk assessment. Help desk maintenance history can help determine focus. We have detailed vulnerabilities guided by the high-level risk assessment, but it's not limited just to those high-level vulnerabilities. The detailed vulnerability assessment may uncover not only new types of vulnerabilities, but also potentially new threats and associated consequences that had not been identified during the initial high-level risk assessment. In other words, new risks. It's easy to get caught in a spiral of identifying vulnerabilities. At some point, a decision has to be made to move forward and review them again in the next iteration. Unfortunately, our adversaries do not take a break and are much better at discovering vulnerabilities than we are. Annex B does not drill down to physical and environmental security. Physical security references can be found in Part 2-1, Subclause 4.3.3.3 on page 33, and in Annex A, Subclause A.3.3.3 on page 97. You may have to go back and update the initial high-level risk assessment. If the identified vulnerabilities don't match the specific risks correctly, that's okay. That's why we have this iterative process. You want to prioritize a method where the initial high-level risk assessment is consistent and your detailed risk assessments consistently support each other. What's the common pitfall? Failure to communicate before, during, and after the risk assessment. Organizational communication is key. Unfortunately, lack of effective communication is a very common issue. You may discover that business unit silos exist. All players should be involved. Now that we've completed our detailed risk assessment for the time being, we'll look at establishing policy, organization, and awareness. This CSMS activity includes creating policies and procedures and implementing them. The implementation includes communicating the policies, training, and assigning organizational responsibilities. Implementation of policy involves communicating the policy to your organization. You've got to train the personnel. You can't just put it out there and give it to them to read. It helps build rapport, collaboration, and some buy-in. Assign responsibility for adherence to the policy. Who is responsible for it? Policies and procedures can impact any of the activities we have. The countermeasures drive specific system and maintenance process implementations. Determining when risk is going to be reassessed must be established. How often are you going to do this? Is it when the next vulnerabilities advertise? Should you look at it once a year, every 12 months? Remember, everything has a cost. Everything requires care and feeding. Again, training and assignment of responsibilities are necessary. Over time, all organizational responsibilities or training topics related to CSMS should be evaluated. It's part of that iterative process. The lists may get smaller as the program matures. What you need to train, what needs to be repeated. Maybe it's just once a year security awareness type training. The next CSMS activity is to select and implement countermeasures. We want to establish risk tolerance. We want to select common countermeasures. Annex A on pages 92 and 94 provides some more information. You want to select the countermeasures, implement the countermeasures, and develop new or modify existing systems. At the same time, we're taking a look at updating our high-level and detailed risk analysis, updating our business continuity, and the incident response plans. So, if you're developing a new system or modifying the existing system, this is going to drive an update to these high-level detailed risk assessments. Let's take a closer look. The selection of countermeasures is the technical process of risk management. How is it driven? By your organization's risk tolerance. You may not be the one who determines what the final risk tolerance is. That's a management decision. Other factors that drive the selection of countermeasures include pre-selected common countermeasures, as well as the results of the high-level risk assessment and the detailed risk assessment. Look at both of those. You may implement a new system or modify an existing system. Then you'll need to update your initial high-level risk assessment, update your detailed risk assessments, and go through the countermeasures that were selected based on the updated risk and fault. It's another iterative process. A common pitfall is that the wrong stakeholders are involved or the right stakeholders are not invited. You could have immature collaborative processes within your organization, and silos and barriers exist. That's where you have to have the management, the senior executives buy-in to help you work some of those out. Breaking down turf issues is a sensitive but important activity. Our next CSMS top activity is to maintain the CSMS. There's a lot to monitor: legal and regulatory constraints, industry practices, available countermeasures, and the effectiveness of the CSMS. Annex A of Part 2-1, page 151, gives you more information. You need to audit compliance with the cybersecurity management system that you developed. You will review the CSMS, refine it, and guess what? The iterative process starts all over again. So maintenance over time requires lots of review based on the review results, and you must do a refinement. What are the effective measures that you have? What are the results? What did audits of conformance from the internal monitoring reveal? Those are your major inputs to this review. Other inputs include external information about available countermeasures, evolving industry practices, and new or changed laws, regulations, and mandates. All of these reviews help identify deficiencies and potential improvements. Use your findings to refine your CSMS. The results of your review may point out the need for improvements. Maybe that poor conformance is caused by a lack of training. You need improvements in your training activities. Or maybe you discover organizational responsibilities need to be better explained. Who does what? Why are they doing them? A common pitfall is a lack of management support. There are not enough resources allocated to this. Management may have to extend too far in too many different directions, or they have cybersecurity fatigue.